For the last 5 weeks in our visit to our library, we've been climbing flights of stairs to gain an understanding of the library before we got into it. And last week we dealt with the last flight of stairs, and that had to do with understanding that there were 3 stacks in the library. So this week we enter the first stack, which is commonly known as the Old Testament, but we're going to be referring to it as the Hebrew Library to give the integrity to it that it deserves, because it was created as the Hebrew Library in about 95 AD, 60 years after the death of Jesus. So Jesus didn't have the Hebrew Library. All he had was at his reading disposal and learning disposal were the writings, some of which became a part of the Hebrew Library, officially determined in, let's say, 90 AD. This is significant because the Greek version of the Old Testament had existed for, 350 years and contained many books that are not in the Hebrew Library. And one of the primary reasons for that is the historical context of 90 AD. The temple had been destroyed by the Roman Empire in 70 AD. The nation, the Hebrew nation, was no more. So the two anchors of Hebrew identity, the temple and being a nation, was gone. Also, many in the Hebrew community at that time felt that there was no future for the Hebrew community because many of the Hebrew community had decided to follow Jesus. They decided the Messiah had come. And so all of this had taken place when a rabbinic council, a council of the rabbis, met in 95, 90 AD. And they had several criteria for the books to be included in the Hebrew Library. First was the Hebrew Library would only contain books that were written in Hebrew. Secondly, it would only include books prior to 160 BC, when the Maccabees started ruling the Roman Empire, and they felt everything after 160 BC was contaminated. And finally, the criteria was that the books that would be included would be books of all the traditions of the Hebrew people. And so both the northern and southern kingdoms, when the Jewish nation was divided, would be included. All the traditions of all the tribes would be included. And both the establishment and the anti-establishment thought in the tradition of the Hebrew people would be included. So as a consequence of applying those standards, 39 books were determined to be in the Hebrew Library. Now, in the Hebrew Library, there are 3 sections. First, the 5 books of instruction. Secondly, the 21 books of the preachers, the prophets. And third, the 13 books of writings. So we have instructional books, preacher books, and a group of writings. Now, the first 5 books is what we're dealing with today. And they're often referred to as the Pentateuch. Penta meaning 5, Pentateuch, meaning rolls. And so we'll explore these 5 books that are commonly referred to as the Torah. Now, the Torah is oftentimes translated, Pentateuch means 5 rolls, and then all 5 rolls together are referred to as the Torah. And a common translation of the Torah is law. But when you dig back into the original meaning of that word Torah, it means instruction. These 5 books are the books of instruction for the Hebrew people. There's a tradition that Moses wrote these 5 books, but this is not the case. There's many scholars point out to the many references to events in the first 5 books that occurred after Moses' life. Moses' death is even reported in the 5 books. That's not to deny the fact that Moses is a pivotal figure in these 5 books, but he was not the author. He was just the prime subject of the 5 books. Now, the clearest statement concerning the importance of these 5 books of instruction, not law, but instruction in the Hebrew Bible, is that the aim for Jewish children was and is today to have the Torah, the instruction for all the Hebrew children to be graven on their souls. So from then until now, the 5 books of instruction is to be graven on the souls of all the Jewish children. Now, these 5 books are just fascinating, and to deal with these in 15 minutes is another impossible dream that I'm trying to follow. But looking at a whole, the first thing we have to recognize is that these books are a composite of 4 written traditions in the Hebrew community. The written traditions in the Hebrew community included the J tradition, and J standing for the first letter in the word that we translate Yahweh, or a word for God. And so this document can be traced to 950 BC. Then we have the written tradition called E, again standing for the word for God, Elohim, and that document can be traced to from 900 to 750 BC, a little bit later than J. And then we have the third document is D, standing for Deuteronomy. The word Deuteronomy means the second law, and Deuteronomy includes the Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4, which is the Jewish daily prayer even to today, the prayer of their allegiance to God. And this document can be traced back to 650 BC. So 950, 850, 650, and then we have the document P. And P stands for priestly, if you will, and that is the religious hierarchy, the priests of Judaism. And this is a group that understood faithfulness to be expressed in liturgy and ritual. So we have these 4 written traditions, all in the Torah, and they are not blended. They are not edited. They simply exist alongside of each other. Now, to show that you have an honest composite rather than an entity blend, for example, there's two stories of creation. There's two stories of how Beersheba got its name. There's two stories of how Bethel got its name. Two stories of the banishment of Hagar and Ishmael. Two stories of the ark, etc., etc., etc. No attempt to put the two stories together, no attempt to blend them. They're simply composed, put alongside each other. Now, brilliant biblical scholars in Hebrew can read the first 5 books and they would immediately say, oh, this is P, or this is D, or this is J, or this is E, because in terms of grammar and the use of language, they sort of stand out alongside each other. But for the reader in English, for instance, those distinctions no longer exist. Now, when did this composite finally get put together? There's one biblical reference that helps us, and it's the biblical reference of Ezra reading from the Torah, reading from the books of instruction. When did this take place? About 400 BC is when the composite was finally written in the same way that the rabbis 500 years later included it as the first 5 books in the Hebrew library. Now, I share this composite understanding because it's so helpful, because it clarifies so much as we look at these first 5 books. For instance, it helps us understand the first 11 chapters in the book of instruction, first 5 chapters in Genesis, and I refer to these stories as campfire stories, answering common questions of children, like, why do human beings seek physical intimacy with one another? Why do moms and dads, parents sleep with each other, for instance? The answer was told in one of these campfire stories, and that is the story of creation that we've dealt with before. And of human beings, the story is that there was a first human being called Adam, and Adam was lonely, and so Adam was went to sleep and was created into 2 human beings, Ish and Isha, male and female. And because they were once one, there is a physical attraction for intimacy, returning to that sense of being one. Now, that's the campfire story. That's to answer a common question of the community. And all of the campfire stories have answers to these common questions of life, human nature, and the remainder of creation. So you see, that's instructional. That is what is supposed to be graven on the souls, to have answers to the common questions of life. This clarity of the composite helps us understand also that the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew library, does not have a prescribed section of history books. The Hebrew library was not put together to be a set of history books. Rather, bits and pieces of history can be gleaned from these books of instruction, can be gleaned by the prophecy, preaching of the day, can be gleaned from the writing from these various sources. History can sort of be created, but the Hebrew Bible is a record of faithfulness, not primarily a record of history. Now, this clarity also helps the reader of the books of instruction, the Torah, to grasp the purpose of these 5 books. Not history, not science, but the record of faith of the Hebrew community. It includes the formation of faith of Abraham, who discovered that God does not demand or expect or is honored or adored through sacrifices. Major step in faith formation. Moses, who helped in the formation of the faith of the Hebrew people by saying, who we believe in, our God, demands that we live a certain way with each other. The source of that moral guideline were the 10 Commandments. Another step in the formation of faith. And then of the priests, the religious leaders of the day, who understood faith to be exercised through liturgy and ritual. And so you see, liturgy and ritual is included in these books of instruction. And finally, the movement of the second law. For the Jews discovered that having 10 commandments and all kinds of rules and regulations was not helpful in terms of the way they related to each other and adored and declared the worth of their God. So in Deuteronomy, in that source, the last of the 5 books, it is the book of the second law, capsulized in the Shema in Deuteronomy 6, 4 and 5. Indeed, what does the Lord require? Indeed, loving God, loving others. And so we see that the first 5 books are not a book of history. The first 5 books are a composite. And the first 5 books are a set of instructions for Jewish people from that time forward, in 90 AD forward. The identity of the Hebrew people was made clear in establishing the Torah, the books of instruction, as the first 5 books in the Hebrew library. What was graven on the souls of Jewish people was no more or less than the history of the faith journey of the Hebrew people. This is what the composite is all about, the formation of the faith of the Hebrew people. And so, as you open your Bible and read the Torah, it is a way of being instructed in terms of the formation of one's faith. There's a lot there. There's 2 semesters, 3 semesters, 4 semesters of courses to cover what we've tried to cover in the Torah in a few minutes. But maybe that gives you a sense of clarity as you might want to read the books. And for your thought and conversation, I have 3 questions. First of all, what's your response to the first 5 books of instruction being books of instruction rather than the law or history of the Hebrew people? Secondly, what's your response to the clarity that these 5 books are a composite rather than a single blended or edited document? And finally, how will the clarity that these books of instruction teach the reader about the faith journey of the Hebrew people alter your reading of the Torah? Enjoy the journey.